Thanks, everybody. So we'll just do some quick intros here first. My name is James Brightman. I'm with GameDaily. I've had close to 2 decades of editorial experience. Used to run gamesindustry.biz as well. And we're here today with Jenova Chen, who hopefully everyone here in the room knows, but if not, Jenova, I'll let you kind of give a little bit of a background. And I bet 90% of the people here have played Journey, but you know that's kind of your claim to fame. But why don't you tell them a bit about yourself first?
Yeah, so we are an indie game developer. We're probably one of the oldest first wave of people who wanted to make indie games, and we started to make indie games on PlayStation. That's before iPhone was even a thing. At that time, to make an indie game, it's quite difficult because you have to go through all these big publishers to get their first-party, third-party approval. So, you know, we were making like PlayStation games, and after making 3 games, we decided to make games for the mobile phone. And you know, it's kind of funny that how we always underestimate how long it would take to make a game. We made our first game in 12 months. We thought we can finish it in 6 months. And then we made our second game. We thought it's going to take a year because that's how long the last game took. And then it took 2 years to make. And when we were making Journey, we thought, okay, 2 years is enough. Let's try to do 1.5 years. Let's not make a 2-year-long game. It's too much. And Journey took us 3 years to make. And then after that, we were like, okay, there's no way we're going to do anything longer than 3 years. And it took us 7 years to make a mobile game. That's where I'm now. Yeah.
Game development is a very complex process. I think most people in this room probably understand that already, being in the trenches. So why don't we kind of go back to the beginning for you? At what age were you when you kind of thought to yourself, wow, this is such a fascinating medium that like I want to become someone who creates interactive entertainment? How did you first get your start in that field?
I think, you know, most of us find our inspiration for a career when we were, you know, teenagers, you know, around 13 to 14 years old, when your brain is just starting to develop. The empathy and frontal cortex is very sensitive to new things, and you are very likely to be impressed by something. And for me, it was movies and video games, things that really touched you. I mean, the first time you cried for something that is not about you, that's a piece of art. And after experiencing that, you know, I start to think about the experience I just had in a game or a movie. And I end up spending weeks to think about what I just experienced, because I'm trying to come to terms of what was that strong experience? How did I have this reaction? Why? And after weeks of thinking, I always find these strong emotional experience gives me learning, and it helps me to grow to become a better person. And I just thought it was the coolest thing, because you know, someone somewhere made this with love, and it was able to transform other people and make their life better.
Right.
And I just thought this is probably the most magical things a human can do. And so I always wanted to be a creator, you know, an artist, to make things that make other people's life better. I just don't know what was my medium. Am I a painter? Am I a filmmaker? Or a game developer? To be honest, I was not sure. I applied for the film school for the animation department because would love to make a Pixar-like movie. But, you know, I guess I was lucky to join the school at the time where they're starting a video game program. And I always thought games was like a bad influence on children. I mean, that's how I was raised. I make games as a hobby when I was in college, but I never thought about making game would be something my parents would respect. Until I came to the States, and when the film school took us to see GDC, when I see people coming, you know, just like a conference like this, when I see people go on the stage it's the Game Developer Choice Award, and particularly the IGF Award. And I saw those people filled with passion and so happy to be on stage. And they thank their parents and they thank their girlfriends. It was just the cutest thing. And after seeing that, I was like, oh, actually, making games could be a respectful, career. Before that, I never thought it was even, I think I would bring shame if I tell my parents I work on games. But after I experienced GDC, I realized that these people are, as respectful as any other medium. So that's how I started to realize there's actually more things I can do in the game industry than animation or film, because those are already established.
Sure.
Where video game is more like this misunderstood underdog that we could do something to help.
So let's talk about a few of those things. You mentioned the words empathy, love, passion. Clearly your design philosophy has been pretty unique and different from a lot of other developers out there. And Sky, Children of the Light, is a game that's based around kind of empathy and compassion and collaboration. And there aren't too many games that kind of foster that. If you were to describe your own design philosophy and sort of how it all came together and how it's evolved since the start of your career, how would you best describe it?
I think there's, looking back, none of these are really my conscious choices. It's always like the timing and what's happening on the society. So back in 2004, our school was encouraging us to make games that would push the boundary of the industry. And more importantly, they have a $20,000 grant for students to pitch against. And I don't have tuition fees. I need to make money to pay tuitions. So that was the reason I got into the competition. But that was the year Grand Theft Auto San Andreas was heavily criticized by the president and a bunch of politicians, and how video games are causing all these shootings. And video game industry is the scapegoat of all these problems.
And we've come full circle. The president just did it again.
Yeah. Again, we're the underdogs. So I'm pretty sure people also blame for the superhero comics back then. Hollywood as well. And so at the time, I thought, well, if I want to innovate, I want to make the opposite of Grand Theft Auto. See how far I could go on that. And at the time, there's all these video game stigma, like how it makes you really addictive. Like a lot of kids who I grew up with, they just keep playing these like random job games, and they got addicted, and they stopped going to school, and they dropped out. Like,
right.
I literally saw 3 people in my class dropped out because playing games. And so addiction was a big problem. Violence, is another issue. The kids seems to have a lot of anxiety. I guess that's what the media was portraying games. So I was thinking, well, games is just a medium, just like the camera. You can use the camera to shoot anything, right? So can we create an experience that is peaceful, that is, not destructive, but creative or healing? So I was kind of thinking about those lines. But at the same time, whenever I make a experience like this, people are always like, that's not a game. This is not game enough. Just give you a very interesting point. So when Flower first came out in 2009, we had a Metacritic of 70-something. Most people would say, this is not a game. There is no goal, there is no points, there's no enemies, there's no boss. So this is crap. This should not be a game. And same game, after 2 more years, re-released on the PlayStation 4 with not a single line of code changing. The Metacritic is like 89, 90, right? Suddenly people are like, oh, this is great, great indie game, I think we are growing with this medium. This medium is only 40 years to 50 years old, and it took cinema 40 years to just find oh, we can actually move the camera around. You know, we can cut shots. We don't have to take everything on one shot, right? And so games is still in its childhood. And going back to say why we start making these type of games is after we made this game called Cloud as a student game. We have all these, I think worldwide we have 600,000 downloads. That was like back in 2005 for a PC zip file. There's not even an install, it's a zip file you download. It's super sketchy, and people were starting to write email to us, and they were telling me that you have to tell all the people who's involved in this project that you are beautiful people. That was a really big shock to me because I've never done anything to deserve anybody to say I'm beautiful, not even my parents. So that having these people's positive confirmation, and all these people from Japan, from Australia, from UK, like I've never been to those countries, and they were saying that you should turn this game you know, into a commercial game because, you know, more people need to know that games is not just about balls and guns and competitions. It could be about something positive. And so many people were telling me about this that I started to realize maybe, you know, there is something, maybe God is giving me a message that I should, you know, make a commercial company even though I have student loans and have no friends or family in the United States. I just thought maybe I should try it. And because I was so naive, I keep going to publishers and could not read their business cue that they are not interested. They never say no, right? So I just keep pitching, and I pitched 20 publishers, and it was, again, time and luck. Microsoft launched their Xbox Live Arcade a year ahead of Sony and Nintendo, and both Japanese publishers are scrambling, trying to catch up, make sure they have their equivalent of digital downloads, but they have no game lined up. So I was like hitting the door at the right time. They were like, oh, you have this Flow game that you already made and already have 5 million people playing this game. Why don't you make a port? So that's kind of like how we started our company. None of these are planned. It's not like I'm a business person, you know,
right.
It was just, yeah, I guess a lot of random coincidence.
So, I mean, something we talked about in the interview that you and I did a few weeks ago for Game Daily is, you know, the industry and a lot of developers just sort of automatically fall into this bucket for genres, like first-person shooter, action RPG, you know, and it's kind of like, how does the industry widen its scope? And I think that's something that you know, you would very much like to see, and that you've kind of part of your design philosophy has been to move in that direction and do something different that doesn't fit any one particular category. And it kind of like, you know, is the industry too insular? Is it creating games for, you know, itself, and why do you think that is?
I think because my goal is slightly different. Like I want to see this medium to not be an underdog anymore, and that's why I make games. But I think a lot of people got into the industry initially was because they enjoy playing games and they want to make games as a living. But as we grow older, as we have family, more of real life challenge comes. So it's more about can we make enough money to make games? And so when you have that drive about can we make money, the interest is not really around inventing new games. It's more about, you know, what games makes money, right? So, but ultimately, I want to say one thing is that because depending on your goal, and if you love games, you want the games to be loved by more people, you would ask the question, why is games the only medium that people say, are you a gamer or not? People never say, are you a film watcher or not? They never say, are you a music listener or not? You know, they don't even say, are you a book reader or not? I mean, even though I rarely read books lately. If you look at the way the genres are divided, whether it's books, or movies, or TVs, or music, they all use these words that describe the feeling because ultimately they are entertainment. Entertainment is like a food industry for feelings, right? Like there's something sour, something sugary, something bitter, right? So if you look at, for example, in novels, you have romance, right? Very sugary. In movie, you have romance. In TV, you have romance. In songwriting, you have romantic songs. But in video games, there is no romance, right? Why does the video game have no romance? Because for a very long time, the game industry has been a console industry, which the majority of the demographic is young men. And what does young man hated the most out of all the movies? Romance, okay? So nobody would bother making a romantic game for a market that is 97% young men. So that particular market is very underdeveloped. It's like a very left-handed person. Another very popular one that's called comedy, right? Comedy is huge. Comedy is the biggest movie genre in terms of its business market size, right? What does comedy mean? It means there's emotion that is mixed together. It's so interesting that you would laugh out, right? Now, there are some very fun video games that it makes you laugh because they're witty dialogues, for example, Portals, right? Or, Monkey Island or something. But when I say genre, video game ultimately is interactive media. It has everything the movie has, but it has interaction, it has sociology, and when a game makes you laugh because the writing is funny, that's called cinematics is funny, right? I'm talking about, can a game through its play that makes you laugh? And we're still at the very beginning of tapping into funny games. Like these days, back then there's a game called Katamari Damacy, which I'd have this weird grin on my face when I play it. Recently, there's some like goat simulators, and there are human fall flat. These are what I would consider as the body humor. It's like Tom and Jerry style, right? But the real humor that we experience in drama, in theater, in movies, there's nowhere to be found in games yet. The most sophisticated game is actually our sister studio, Giant Sparrow, that made a game called Edith Finch. That is actually what I consider the first black humor ever in the game industry. So anyway, coming back, if you really look at how game industry divide their games into genres, they don't use emotions. They don't even see games as entertainment. They see games as a software. That's where games come from. So you ask me, do you play shooting games, right? First-person shooting or third-person shooting? What's the difference emotionally, right? Top-down shooting or massively multiplayer shooting, right? It doesn't tell you anything about how this thing's supposed to make you feel, right? But I've grown old enough. I've played a funny shooting game like Serious Sam. I've played a very scary shooting game like Resident Evil. I've played a very action-packed shooting game like Gears of War, or action-adventure that is more like Uncharted. They're all shooting games, right? But we are not really labeling this entertainment medium using feelings. And yeah, even today, like we have this genre called arcade. What does that even mean when it comes to feelings?
Right.
So yeah, that's how I feel. Like in other medium, we say, what kind of mood are you in for a movie? Or what kind of mood are you in for music? What kind of mood are you in for a game, right? We don't even make game based on the mood. How would people know there's content for them? Anyway, I start to ranting now.
It's a great point. I wanted to come back to, you mentioned Giant Sparrow, and some people here in the audience may not be aware that you actually have done some sort of advising for the indie label Annapurna Interactive, and they've made some fantastic games, What Remains of Edith Finch, and a whole lot of others that, Garagoa, and it's just, it shows that your commitment to the indie space and to kind of advancing the medium for these types of games, similar to the types of games that you create, you want to do something different. And you told me in our interview a few weeks ago that you chose the lesser profitable path and that you could have made something where you could have been more successful financially, but maybe those two things don't have to be kind of juxtaposed. Maybe you can get to the point where the industry is maturing and you're leading the way, and maybe it becomes the, ultimately equally or more profitable path in the long run. Mm-hmm. Do you think you could go that way?
Yeah, I mean, I think at some point, if you look at the history of film, I talk about film a lot because I'm from film school. Every indie success will become mainstream. And from that point on, that is no longer indie. Hitchcock turned thriller into a mainstream genre. And Minecraft, was totally indie. It was literally a guy working at his home, off work hours, very experimental, not looking like any games. But after it becomes so popular, a bunch of people are making Minecraft clones. You don't call these people indies. You just say these are fans. They're chasing for the success, right? So, I mean, indie games are people who's trying something new. That there is no proven financial model of financial success yet. I think only the people who really, really love the game medium and who really see something different would dare to risk their youth and their financials for things like this. And I think they deserve to be, applauded. Because ultimately, when someone hits something big, either themselves or whoever follows would actually turn that into mainstream. So for what we do as Annapurna is we realized that people are growing old. Like when I first came to America, that's 2003, we're already hearing people talk about how video game is going to take over the world. It's going to be the next biggest thing because the average age of gamer is 35 years old. Just imagine 15 years later, everybody will be 50. That will be the average age of gamers. Game is going to finally take over, right? My mentor was Bing Gordon from EA. He always say, oh, those people who don't play game, they will just die soon, right? And everybody's going to grow up with games, so it's going to be mainstream. Don't worry. And 15 years has passed. Is the average age of gamer today 50 years old? Right. So something has to be done,
sure.
Right? And that's why we felt, as we grow older, we start to appreciate different type of experiences. Like when I was a kid, I loved to play World War II shooters because I've never been to the war. I wanted to feel like a war hero. But after you play like 10 different interpretations of D-Days and you see another one coming, I'm just like, I'm done with this. I don't need to go back there, Right. And as we grow older, we are more interested in things that is more about life, more about mortality, more about taking care of family, the balance between work and, family, and, the meaning of life, and the sadness of the reality.
Right.
And, I think the word humanity is what we talk about a lot. Adults wants to see something that touches upon the humanity. Otherwise, it's just a waste of time. And so at Annapurna, the only real rule we applied here is this talking about something fundamentally human? Is this talking about something that the creator fundamentally care about? Even if the game is so cool, it's like, it's definitely going to sell, has flashy graphics, amazing technology. That's not the criteria. The criteria is this thing relevant to an adult?
Right.
And so that's kind of what we're trying to push for, is to see if we can make games still relevant as you grow older. To be honest, like these days, I don't even have time to play any games with a very significant long of time investment. Sorry.
It's okay. So why don't we talk a little bit about when you started That Game Company, you were still in your master's program, and that's actually, for me, I see, there's so many indies, including folks out there, and, there are widely available tools. people don't necessarily get into game design programs. If you were starting out today as a fresh face, would you kind of advocate kind of just building up your games portfolio and using the tools that are out there that are freely available? Or would you say, you know what, this game education, getting into a game design program at a big university somewhere, that's the better way to go?
From my own experience, I think the most important thing is not to learn from the school or the teachers, but to learn from your classmates. Teachers are always going to be 5 to 10 years obsolete, otherwise they wouldn't be teaching, you know. This is kind of extreme, but that's how I think. And so whatever you learn from school, if it's really a timely skill like a technology, a code, or particular techniques to apply 3D rendering or shader, those things all would fade away very quickly. So what you really should learn from your teacher is the classic, the things that's timeless, the things that actually ties to humanity, you know. But it's your students, it's your classmates who are actually passionate about making games. I think one nice thing about the games program is it's guaranteed everybody who come here, at least the top half, are actually here to make games, right? And you will be able to find, you know, like-minded people to work on things together, and that's really the best way you can learn is through practice. You know, we've been hiring people from various schools, and we noticed that the school that puts students together, cross-disciplined, and make them working on projects, they actually have real practical experiences. The school that just teaches you to follow the book, you know, and the student might have some ambitious ideas, but they've never tried to turn into reality. They always underperform, right? And I think ultimately the most valuable thing is find like-minded people, learn from each other, and make something through mistakes, and you will learn the best.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we'll kind of circle back to the beginning where you talked about, you know, your passion and kind of, you know, being at the forefront of that indie movement back at the time when PlayStation was getting involved with it a bit more. Considering that we have the Indie Prize going on out there and there are lots of indies, what is some of the best advice that you could pass on to indies who would kind of look to you almost, you know, now all this time later as one of the leaders in the space and a mentor, and what would you tell them that, you know, that they need to do looking at the market today?
Yeah, actually I got asked a lot because a lot of students want to start their own indie studios, and they were like, well, you were lucky back then, you had a chance to have a publisher backing you up, but they're not doing that anymore, right? And it's hard to find money. I think the one thing that is interesting is money is always around. You know, after the publisher is gone, there came a VR fad, and there's a lot of money that could sponsor people to start a small studio to make VR content. There was also a phrase of Connect, and then there's VR, and then after VR there's this, how to say, like, machine learning. I mean, there's always new trendy things where the money will be going around, and there's always opportunity. Ever after I graduate, I've seen students coming out of our school, starting their studio year after year. I mean, certainly nowadays, well, several years ago, mobile was very hot. So I saw students starting mobile studio and finding investment money. But I think the most important tips is always start your project less than half the size you think you want to make. Because I've made all these mistakes again and again. If you think you can make a game and you raise money to do a 1-year-long production, you will never finish it. So always keep your scope really, really small. So shipping is better than having good ambitions and not deliver, right? So shipping allows you to learn and allows you to, you know, build on top of success. So that would be my recommendation.
Okay. Well, I think I have a boatload more questions, but I want to be fair to the audience. So we're going to open it up to audience Q&A for the few remaining minutes that we have, I believe. So if someone's got a question for Jenova, just raise your hand.